Right, so welcome to episode 2 of the third series of Priority Message, the podcast from the Fire and Rescue Services Association. In this episode, I will be speaking with Phil Garrigan, the new chair of the National Fire Chiefs Council. Phil Garrigan OBE and KFSM lives in Wirral, having grown up in Maghull. Hopefully I've said that right, Phil, and joined Merseyside Fire and Rescue Service in 1990. And over that time, progressed through the ranks, taking up the post of Chief Fire Officer in 2017. Phil led the Fire and Rescue Service's response to COVID-19 as the National Fire Gold Commander, working with the Home Office, unions and partner agencies that led to national agreements enabling firefighters to drive ambulances, deliver PPE to NHS and care staff, and deliver prescriptions and food to vulnerable people, producing a lasting legacy for the future of the fire and rescue services and communities across the country. Phil has also led the service through 3 inspections by HMRC FRS, in which the service achieved 3 outstanding ratings, the only fire and rescue service in the country to do so. These, amongst other factors, led to the service receiving the highest civic honour, the Freedom of the City of Liverpool, in 2022. So, Phil Garrigan, welcome to Priority Message.
Thanks, Tristan.
Hopefully all that information was correct.
Yeah, it was, apart from the pronunciation of Maghull.
Maghull. Oh, God, I know. I should have checked beforehand, shouldn't I?
No, you're absolutely fine. Yeah, the rest of it is reasonably accurate.
Good. So you are a man of one service, a career of just totally one service.
Yeah, I was 35 years in Merseyside, although I did step out of Merseyside for 12 months. I went to work for, and it wasn't kind of like a secondment, but it wasn't necessarily, went to work for the Liverpool City Council to work on community cohesion across a number of areas. And that was as much to get me just a little bit of insight into how you can do things differently in different organisations. But, predominantly, 34 of those 35 years have been, spent in Merseyside Fire and Rescue Service.
And you'll have seen a huge change over that period of time from when you joined in 1990 to when you left earlier on this year. Yeah,
incredible changes, both culturally, but equally, and it's not lost on anyone, seen reductions in the number of firefighters and fire engines over that period of time. When I started back in 1990, we had over 1,200 firefighters. When I left Merseyside, more in the region of about 700. We had real difficult periods of austerity to deal with. But the services, functioned, or certainly, when I was the chief and self-evidently will be moving forward, functioned really, really well and effective at protecting communities. So, yeah, there has been changes, probably far too many to mention, but, 35 years is a long time to work in any organisation.
Yeah, it certainly is. I guess obviously because of the length of time and the period of time you were a chief fire officer, but what was the reasoning behind retiring and then taking up the post as the chair of the NFCC?
That's a good question. And I suppose my answer's a little odd maybe. When I joined, I set my stall out quite early on to work for 35 years and retire from Merseyside Fire and Rescue Service at the age of 55. And you could argue, well, you can change your view as you go along, but 35 years is a long time. 7 years as the chief fire officer in Merseyside, and I do think there's a tenure to be really at the top of your game and not to go back and repeat the things that you've previously done or make changes because you think that there's a necessity to make change. I certainly think the first couple of years are formative. The next probably 4 or so are where you can have the biggest impact as a leader in a fire and rescue service because you understand the people. And then the last one was, I suppose, is a part and parcel of me transitioning out of Merseyside. And that lined up with Mark Hardigan, the previous chair of the National Fire Chiefs, his 4-year tenure coming to an end. And it just seemed that the stars were aligned as I would leave Merseyside after 35 years on the 26th of March, the opportunity to become the chair of the National Fire Chiefs would open up on the 1st of April. And it seemed, well, not just too good an opportunity to pass up, but also it felt like the right Merseyside Fire and Rescue Service as well. So, yeah, and look, and the things that I probably, would want to do nationally, that I couldn't necessarily do locally, probably recognise that. And then this gives me the opportunity to open up those conversations at a national level and back into government.
And because, the nature of Merseyside not having any on-call and the FRSA, previously the RFU being predominantly an on-call membership base, we never really interacted, did we, until COVID, which was the first time I think we spoke on the telephone. It was good that you reached out to us, and I thought your approach was very, very positive and productive. And I appreciate the fact that when you were aware that you were becoming the chair of the NFCC, you reached out again. I'm just wondering, because of the fact that Merseyside doesn't have any on-call, how are you going to deal with that particular element of your role, and how are you going to provide the leadership and the drive in terms of all the challenges that the on-call face across the country?
Yeah, look, the straightforward answer to that is listen. Listen to people like yourself, Tristan, and getting about fire and rescue services where they've got a predominance of on-call. In a nice spot where I was up in Cumbria yesterday, interviewing for assistant chief officers roles, but you get immersed in the priorities for a more rural fire and rescue service, and you recognise, and it's self-evident, you can touch and feel it, the kind of contribution that on-call firefighters make the length and breadth of this country. So whilst Merseyside, was predominantly a whole-time service, it did have whole-time retained, recognising the ability to bring resources back in when the demand required it. But look, and I'm not just saying this because you're interviewing me at this particular point in time. The value I place on call firefighters is extensive. I see the things that they do. I spend time doing a peer review in the Isle of Man, funnily enough, and the commitment from individuals over there, the time that they give up to serve their communities is incredible. And I kind of pride myself on being part of what was Merseyside Fire and Rescue Service, but the Fire and Rescue Service more broadly. And if you can't see that, then irrespective of me being from a metropolitan fire and rescue service, then I'm in the wrong job. And certainly I wouldn't have taken on the national role if I didn't recognise that I am now representing fire and rescue service the length and breadth of the country nationally, not just from a single fire and rescue services perspective. And that again, without digressing too much, that bleeds directly into things like the comprehensive spending review submission that we put in, which talks at length about inequalities that exist across fire and rescue services, and that talks about the kind of rural sparsity. It does talk about item levels of deprivation and the challenges that they present, but recognising that fire and rescue services are all built differently and they need to be all resourced differently. But one thing is absolutely fundamental. The people that work for them are incredible, irrespective of whether they are whole-time or on-call. And the fact that on-call members of the team are prepared to give up their personal space and their time is, that's exactly what reflects the values of the Fire and Rescue Service, and something which I hold in the greatest of esteem.
No, I acknowledge that and appreciate that. And I think it's poignant at this juncture then just to acknowledge the Bicester incident and the fact that firefighters Martin Sadler and Jenny Logan were killed, along with local businessman Dave Chester. At the time of recording this podcast, two further firefighters sustained serious injuries and are currently in hospital. They are conscious and remain in a stable condition, and we send our very best wishes for a swift and full recovery. And it's just a reminder, if one was needed, Phil, of just how dangerous the job is, how precious life is, and how important it is that we ensure that all the relevant systems of work, the equipment, the structure needs to be worked on continuously to ensure that those that go out on the fire truck are the same as those that come back in exactly the same condition.
Yeah, look, absolutely. And again, I spent Monday down in Oxfordshire Fire and Rescue. The impact that the loss has had on that particular service. But as I say, the ripples that extend beyond Oxfordshire Fire and Rescue Service, to be perfectly honest with you. Martin was a whole-time firefighter in London Fire Brigade, worked for Berkshire. So, the three services directly impacted by that tragic loss. But it goes way beyond that. So fire and rescue services up and down the country have sought to provide support, lean in, assist trade union representatives similarly.
Yeah.
Because we are a big family, and when the family is knocked and rocked, then the fire and rescue service seeks to step in and provide support and comfort. And look, I've seen that firsthand over the last week. So tragic, and our thoughts and prayers go out to families of the deceased, and also the families of the injured, and also importantly the family of David as well, the member of the public who lost his life as well. Absolutely.
So just going back to your new role, we've had Mark Hardingham on the pod probably about 2 years ago now. I'm grateful to him. Mark is an extremely personable chap. Got on with him really well. And I just wondered how, if at all, your approach is going to be different from Mark's over the next 4 years.
Yeah, I'm not as tall as Mark in the nicest possible way. So,
not many people are.
No, that's quite true. And you're quite right, he is personable. And you'd also recognise that I was the vice chair of the National Fire Chiefs at the same time as Mark was the chair. And he's, we share a similar set of values, to be perfectly honest with you, in regards to how we go about things. The only thing I would say is maybe slightly different in approaches. I think Mark is far more diplomatic than I am at times, and that's a real good thing. That's a real strength, and he would explain what I meant when I was a little bit more forceful in making my point into ministers and into government, maybe. But I'm not. That's probably the slight difference, really. I'm probably a bit more forward-leaning in respect of my expectations of others in regards to how they protect firefighters and how they support fire and rescue services. And so, probably the best example I've got more latterly is the comprehensive spending review submission is very forceful in making its points about reinvestment back into the fire and rescue service. And it's making points, I think, that haven't necessarily been made by the National Fire Chiefs Council up until this point. But I am absolutely adamant they are points that need to be made. And self-evidently, they are areas where we want to see that reinvestment back in to offset some of the austerity, but also, meet some of the kind of challenges that are now becoming more and more foreseeable, like the climate change and so on and so forth. So that's it. Probably the only slight difference is I'm a little bit more maybe spiky, a little bit more noisy than Mark may have been on certain points.
Personally, I like spiky and prickly and forceful because normally people pay a bit more attention when you're like that. So I look forward to that approach, to be honest with you, Phil. So that'll be good. Yeah. You've mentioned the comprehensive spending review a couple of times. We've recently had the pay award been agreed, it would appear, 3.2%. And obviously, as a trade union, we would welcome that increase. The concern we've got, it's yet another unfunded pay rise, and services up and down the country will be scrapping around trying to find out how they're going to find that additional money and the potential consequences, which could lead to maybe reductions in establishment, maybe stations changing duty systems, etc. And from our perspective, and my guess is that you're on the same page, that we need long-term funding. We need structured funding so that people can pre-plan. So we don't have this ongoing annual cycle whereby we have all what I call the theatre of the pay negotiations. And then all the chiefs up and down the country thinking, okay, right, where am I going to find this lump of money this time? Which causes instability. It makes the chiefs and senior leadership team's job a lot harder. And I wonder what your thoughts were on making that or a reform model on how the finances can be made going forward.
Yeah, look, I think it's well kind of documented really that a 3-year funding settlement will be far easier for fire and rescue services to administer, to plan for, and be clearer in regards to delivery of ambition in the longer term. When you reference the whole raft of things around the funding, and the comprehensive spending review asks for more funding, because there are things which I've just touched on before, which are emergent, and the risks that were arguably weren't there when I joined 35 years ago, but are now. Climate change being an example, but also some of the emerging technology. And I want to know and make sure that the fire and rescue services are equipped to respond to those particular challenges. And the funding needs to reflect that. And that's probably some of the points that I made. Equally, we want to diversify the workforce. It's a government priority, as whether it's a fire and rescue service one, and it just self-evidently makes us better at delivering services into our communities. But the lack of capital investments has meant that some of our fire stations, the length and breadth of the country, aren't as welcoming to certain kind of members of the population, certainly from a gender perspective, as they should be. And I'd say that some of those fire stations aren't fit for purpose for anyone, to be perfectly honest with you, irrespective of your gender. But the fact of the matter is that needs kind of inward capital investment from government. That capital investment is seen in other public sector organisations, but hasn't been for us for a long time, and it has an impact. And equally, we touch on well-being of staff and firefighters, particularly around management of the contaminant risk. Again, in a similar vein, we need capital investment back into the service to allow us to manage that more effectively, to mitigate against those risks, to the level that we, collectively, and I mean collectively from rep bodies, trade unions and management would want to see. So, the funding needs to follow the risk, but it also needs to reflect the lack of investment in the fire and rescue service over a period of time. And that lack of investment also extends into some of the central functions of the fire and rescue service too. The ability to support fire and rescue services, to provide guidance, and that kind of guidance be informed by research and so on and so forth. So my view is there's a fairly significant amount of reinvestment back into the service required. I'm looking to kind of come back to, and that's what that CSR submission says. How effective that will be and whether that will land with government is to be determined. But you and the listeners have my assurance that I ain't going away anytime soon. And I will be continuing to press those points, whether it be in this CSR or in future ones. And certainly whether it's a 1-year settlement or it's a 3-year settlement, them points are still key.
You've referred to the government now. I just wonder what your thoughts are on the move away from the Home Office to housing in local communities.
Yeah, I've been asked that one probably a couple of times, and my response is the jury's out really. I can see the legitimacy under the changes around Grenfell Phase 2 and the recommendations to put fire and fire safety in its broader sense into one governmental department to provide that real level of scrutiny, that golden thread. But we did a significant amount of work outside of a protection lens in regards to some of the work that we've done with Home Office over a period of time around violence, antisocial behaviour, and the kind of contribution we've made within those particular areas. So I wouldn't want to see that stuff diminish, because I think the value that we add into communities and the changes and the impact that we can have is significant. And equally, I would want to make sure that MHCLG are fully conversant of the role of the fire and rescue service, what we're equipped to do, how capable the people we employ are, and how we can support them, and more broadly, and probably more importantly, the public during times of crisis, but equally during the times of normality for us, but crisis for them when they have a tragic event and we can step in and support them.
And I guess, bearing in mind, you've mentioned it, and there's no secret that you've been around for 35 years. This is my 28th year as well, and you end up seeing things go full circle. So we used to be in the Home Office, we got moved out. We went back to the Home Office and we've got moved out again. And yeah, I think the response was time will tell. And I think that's exactly where we are with regards to the move. But we recently met with some civil servants, and they were keen on talking about the College of Fire. Obviously, that's been spoken about recently with regards to HMICFRS and the white paper. And I just wondered what your thoughts were on that. You talk about research and development, talk about leadership, etc. What your thoughts overall with regards to a College of Fire? Obviously, we used to have the Fire Service College that was in public ownership and then went private. And not only that, how you think it would benefit if it does come into being, what it would look like, etc. I just wonder what the thoughts were on that point, Phil.
Okay, and look, and I think the most salient bits is, you've got to understand or ask yourself the reason why. So if you go back to the government white paper described functions of a college. So research being, an example, leadership, not necessarily a physical building. If you look at Grenfell Phase 2, it kind of leads more into a physical building alongside some of those functions. I'm not sure that's clearly defined as yet, and certainly in those kind of conversations with government, I'm not sure they have landed necessarily on what problem they're seeking to resolve in respect of the kind of the operating model. But certainly, I think we'd have to be honest with ourselves and reflect back on some of the kind of the reasoning behind it, that kind of that inconsistency that exists across fire and rescue service, that lack of research, that lack of research then forms national guidance and national approaches. That if the college brings some kind of consistency in regards to that, so the members of the public, irrespective of whether they are in Oxfordshire, Merseyside, Manchester, can be assured of the same or appropriate level of service, then that's a good thing. The College of Fire, I don't consider to be a threat in any way, shape, or form. I do think that we can probably capitalise on it to make it fire and rescue service better, more professional, and improve on that basis. So so that from that side of it, very supportive of having the discussion, describing what the functions are. Clearly seeking the investment back into the fire and rescue service would come with the discharge of those functions. I am less, if I'm honest with you, less convinced about it being a building, it being a place where people train. I do recognise the value in cross-service training. I really do think that's beneficial, and some of the things that I learned as a junior officer, we learned from other fire and rescue services, junior officers as part and parcel of training courses. But I think we can facilitate that with the infrastructure that exists across the UK as it stands, or with some small level of enhancement. We are bringing services together, maybe on a regional footprint or in a geographical location which is more accessible, more efficient, and arguably more effective. So College of Fire, look, I'm up for the discussion. I'm certainly up for the kind of the debate and what the function should be. And equally, I would recognise the value of training together, exercising together, and the benefits of that, but just not to the detriment of the localities that already exist across the UK.
Yeah, I always think of a centre of excellence whereby you have that national resource that you can tweak as and when you see fit to the local circumstances. And to a degree, the NFCC have been providing that, haven't they?
Yeah, they have. And when you look at some of the work that's been produced nationally to help and support fire and rescue services, deliver national standards, fire standards being an example of that. Some of the toolkits, some of the guidance is really kind of provide a level of consistency, but probably not to the extent that I would want that kind of consistency to be informed. The other thing I would say, and again, I don't want to overplay the research piece, but we have reached out into Europe for research around firefighting tactics more latterly, because we don't hold that research within the UK. Now, that's probably a detriment to us, to be perfectly honest with you. And we should be at the vanguard of that work, and at the vanguard of firefighter safety, firefighter tactics, and the production of guidance which reflects that research. That's where I want us to be. At the forefront of firefighting globally, rather than even singularly in Europe. And if that's where I aspire to take the Fire and Rescue Service through the support that the National Fire Chiefs Council can provide them with, then that's a strong ambition, I would suggest, and something that we are clearly focused on.
Just going back to the white paper, something that I've still not really got my head around, to be honest with you, and maybe I should have done, but the operational independence, and whether you can provide any clarity, particularly for me, if not for the listeners, as to what difference that operational independence actually means. I've read the various documents, and to be honest with you, I'm not really any the wiser.
Okay, so again, you'll get my take on this. As Phil Garrigan, I suppose, to some degree, and 35 years in Merseyside and the like. Being able to deploy your resources as a chief fire officer based on the demands that you face and the risks that you face is pretty pivotal. There's a whole significant changes around governance, I suppose, and there's a real focus on governance at this moment in time. So you'll have seen work around devolution, and we have, as we well know, a mixed bag of governance arrangements which support the Fire and Rescue Service to deliver, scrutinise, and in a variety of different ways are the employer of the chief. And I suppose what we are seeking to assure is that the role of the firefighter, the chief fire officer, is consistent across all of those different governance models. So a chief officer in one place is not afforded some kind of ways that of working that aren't afforded to someone somewhere else. And as you get a multitude of governance models, the kind of consistency and the understanding of what is the role of the chief needs to be defined. Arguably, that's described as operational independence, or you could argue it's equally discharged through a clear scheme of delegation within a constitutional arrangement. But the role of the chief fire officer in the deployment of resources and protection of the safety of the public and their teams should be within the remit of the chief fire officer. That would be my view.
I just on the governance point, because this has been kicked around for a number of years as well. This is just my take on it. There is no one system of governance that is better than another system. I think that's been proven up and down the country. We've got PFCCs where the services are performing well and not performing well. We've got county, we've got mayoral, we've got fire authorities of all different shapes and sizes. For me, whatever the governance model is, it's the people or person within it. And I think the fact that South Wales have got their fire commissioners currently, I know it's a temporary structure at the minute, but you've got people there who, and I'm probably going to be able to say things that you're not going to be able to say with wearing your hat, but people there who really do understand the role. They do understand the fire service. They might not have understood it as well when they initially came in, but they certainly got to grips with it, knows what needs to be done, and has got an air of authority and accountability and understanding that fluctuates to varying degrees up and down the country. I mean, I've sat in fire authority meetings, and I've said this many times before, so this isn't new, where you've got people there who are playing on their phones, they're half asleep, some are actually falling asleep. People don't understand the terminology, even though they've been fire authority members for a number of years. And there is a lack of training, I think, for elected members within certain governance models that doesn't best serve the public, doesn't best serve the employees or SLT. And I think the sooner the sector deals with that level of competence and training and development and understanding, rather than focus on a particular structure, the better. Now, I didn't want to necessarily put you in a corner there, but I do think, whether it's a PFCC, whether it is a fire authority, you do need to have people around the table who fully understand how the fire service works and the implications of any decisions that they make.
Look, and our position has always been that you want good governance, right? And look, and I don't. It's interesting not to be challenging, but I don't recognise the bits about fire authority members sitting on phones and being half asleep. Right? I genuinely don't from my authority's perspective. But I do come back to you need good governance and you need good levels of scrutiny. I'm very, very comfortable and always was about people holding me to account for the things that I do or don't do. And whether that is consistent across the board is to be debated. I equally think it's a fundamental role and requires training of authority members and lead members to be able to scrutinise effectively, to ask the right questions, to have the right level of understanding. That is something that I'd argue should be strengthened across the board to provide you and members of the public and firefighters with the assurance that the decisions that I'm making as the Chief Fire Officer get the right level of scrutiny to ensure that we are utilising public money in the right way, we're protecting the well-being of staff in the right way, and we're utilising our finances in a frugal manner which delivers an efficient and effective service. So that's really important. Good governance is incredibly important, and we've seen examples of where governance has maybe come up short more recently. But the fact of the matter is, I'd kind of agree. There's maybe not one type of governance which is better than the other. But I'll tell you what would benefit the fire and rescue service some level of consistency in relation to that governance. So we haven't got a multitude of different models. We've got one which allows us to apply an equal set of metrics to the performance of that authority based on how the authority is performing, not what its governance looks like.
Something you mentioned earlier on in the conversation was about diversity, and I just wanted to explore that a bit more. We're still looking at services broadly having 95% white male, etc. And that there seems, from our perspective, there seems to be that consistent barrier of taking that massive leap. We've seen the police do it to a degree, to a significant degree compared to fire. I think it's more like 30-odd% in terms of the gender difference in police. I just wondered what your thoughts were on how we can improve that diversity within the workforce. You've already touched on the benefits that can have, but definitely interested in how we break those barriers down a bit more.
Yeah. Look, and police and fire are different beasts, if I'm honest with you. And whilst we're both public sector organisations, I'm not sure there's a like-for-like comparison based on the breadth of the roles that you can fulfil as a police officer. Maybe it's slightly different in relation to a firefighting role. So that said, look, that's not me making an excuse in the first instance, because I kind of come back to. And again, I don't want to reference the 35 years again, but the first female firefighter joined Merseyside Fire and Rescue Service 2 weeks before I did. And funny enough, I've been to the States more recently, and looking, and again, I'm not digging out the States in any way, shape, or form. There's some incredible work done in America, but I was still having to kind of correct people utilising the language of firemen. And whilst people might think that's a really minor thing, it's not. If you are a firefighter and a female firefighter in the fire and rescue service, you don't want to have to keep reminding people that we have a diverse workforce. And the small things that you can do to make those changes, to create that environment where people feel as though they belong, a part of the team, and they are fundamentals for us all. But you have to come back to how do you make our service, fire and rescue services more broadly, welcoming for a variety of different protected groups, minority groups, and so on. So for people who haven't necessarily accessed the fire and rescue service in this way previously, and that's by trying to make them as those environments as welcoming as we possibly can. I refer back to my view around capital investments into the fire and rescue service. And if you haven't got facilities for the female firefighter, say, well, don't be surprised if a female firefighter doesn't want to come and work for you.
Yeah.
If you're still not tackling the issues around kit and equipment, and probably more fire kit and the appropriate fitting and so on and so forth, then that doesn't send out necessarily the right message around being a place where everyone comes to work and thrives. So getting some of the fundamentals right within your own services and within services is absolutely crucial. Going out and positively looking to recruit people and to diversify your workforce is equally important. If people don't know how to access or can't see themselves in that particular organisation, then don't be surprised if they don't step through the door. And we continue to be relentless around our kind of pursuit around that diversity. And I do come back to a pretty fundamental is explaining the why. Why do we think that's important? Because actually, if you've got a diverse workforce which reflects your communities, you're better able to meet the needs of those communities. So forget everything else. It's a business case. It's about representing your community. It's about supporting your communities. It's about understanding their risks and their needs, and having an organisation that does that and reflects the diversity of the place where you live and work. And that will just make fire and rescue services better. So you just have to kind of continue to be relentless in the pursuit of a diverse workforce that reflects the makeup of your community.
Yeah, and you're talking the same language as us. We've been advocating various initiatives over the years. We see the benefits of a more diverse workforce that reflects the community. It helps to improve recruitment and retention. I'll come on to the broadening of the role a bit later in our conversation, but it certainly helps with regards to that. I'm not going to put you on the spot and start talking about fitness standards. I think that's time for another conversation with regards to that. But I think we still need to bottom out as a sector the fitness standards and the potential barrier that it has to improving a diverse workforce. But on a similar vein, culture. Obviously, the fire and rescue services have been in the media more often than not for the wrong reasons. And it's always a minority that affects the majority. And I very, very much hope, and I did feel very sorry for Mark during his period as chair when he was in the spotlight when all this was going on. I very much hope we've turned a corner with regards to that, and that the fire service will be in the media spotlight for all the positive reasons. I just wonder what your thoughts are with regards to how that's affected services up and down the country. I mean, on the one hand, we want a diverse workforce. We want to outreach to these people who would otherwise not see the fire and rescue service as a career choice. And then the flip side, they're reading all this stuff in the media about what type of working environments some fire and rescue services are alleged to be, and how that's sort of brought us back and taken us back a couple of years, and how frustrating that is for leaders up and down the country, and all the strides that we had taken going forward previously.
Yeah, okay. And I feel compelled to answer your question around fitness standards and standards more broadly, really.
All good.
Well, so okay, so I will. Look, we want people who join the fire and rescue service, and can effectively do the job. And so to be able to assure ourselves of that, you set a standard which is, it doesn't matter whether you are, what race, religion you are, or gender you are. There's the standard that's been set, and attaining that standard means you join the fire and rescue service and you can be effective in your role. That's fundamental. The positive action relates to getting people to the start line in the first instance and support them to reach that level of fitness and sustain it over their career. I don't think it's any more complicated than that, to be perfectly honest with you. In regards to culture more broadly, and you reference a backward step, I suppose my take on that is sometimes you've got to step back to step forward. And I think that's probably what we've seen. So, the calling out of behaviour which is just wholly inappropriate is absolutely right and fitting. And 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 we need to see more of that. If people's behaviours aren't or don't reflect the values of the fire and rescue service, then those individuals should be protected in any way, shape, or form at whatever level of an organisation that should be called out, and services should address it. And I said in part and parcel of my original submission into the role of the chief, chair of the chief fire officers, then I won't defend the indefensible, and I won't. Right. And again, I go back to being a little bit spiky or whatever else. But if someone's behaviour isn't befitting of the role of a firefighter or someone who works for the fire and rescue service, then in the nicest way, I won't be defending that behaviour in any way, shape, or form. But I equally, kind of come back to culture, and a lot of the conversations, Tristan. I know you were on the Home Affairs Select Committee as well, and a lot of the conversations, landed singly at the end on that. That arguably, what perceived as the killer question of, is your fire and rescue service institutionally racist, misogynist, homophobic, etc. And I think the conversation has moved on a little bit, because when you get posed that question, it's very much around you as a chief fire officer and your institution and your responsibility for this kind of creation of this environment where people think that behaviour or that type of behaviour is acceptable. But it's not. The language I would much prefer, and has been used more subsequently in ministerial advisory groups, is systemic. I think it's a better reflection of the reasons why the culture was as the culture was when some of the stuff started to surface. Because I do go back to culture and the environment that we work in is everyone's responsibility. Of course, huge responsibility of a chief fire officer who leads the organisation. But I do put it down back to representative bodies, to individuals. I actually extend it into fire authorities and the way that they behave in government. And I have referenced the fact, and a couple of times on this call, if you haven't got the inward investments to be able to change the way your fire stations look and feel, then you're not going to diversify your workforce in the way that you would want to. Your culture's not going to shift in the way that you would want either. People don't feel valued because the building that they're working in is falling apart around it. That creates a kind of has the potential to create a negative culture where people don't feel value, and then all of a sudden you start to normalise behaviours which aren't appropriate for the fire and rescue service. So I think everyone understanding that cultural shift that we are making now, and we are making it, by the way, in a really positive way, is it takes all key stakeholders, all people with responsibility to support that shift. I think is a fundamental for me. But we are, the NFCC have done a hell of a lot of work around culture improvements, action plans, support fire and rescue services in a multitude of different ways to assist them to address some of the real concerns that the HMI raised, quite legitimately raised too, I hasten to add, and make progress. Now, let me be clear here, I don't think we are there yet. I still think, if I scratch the surface, maybe in a couple of places, then you might still see some culture that we don't necessarily feel is appropriate. But we will know when we are there, because people will call it out, and we'll have created a really hostile environment for negative culture, and that's when we know that we're in a far better place, and we all take responsibility for that. We don't just passport the blame from one organisation, one service to another. We take responsibility for the progress that we've made, and we take responsibility when we hit a bump in the road and we need to kind of go back, to step back forward again.
Yeah, I'd agree with pretty much everything you said there. The whole Home Affairs Committee, it felt to me like, let's get the opening tagline for the 10 o'clock news that particular night or whatever, which is not helpful for anybody. Systemic, I think, is probably the right way to look at it. The trouble is when you acknowledge or claim that the organisation you're responsible for is institutionally racist, etc. When does it stop? How do you measure that? When can you measure that it's not anymore? That's why I felt particularly it was unhelpful, and everybody within that organisation is labelled with working for an organisation that is institutionally racist. So, which is why I replied in the way that I did on that particular occasion, because I don't think any fire and rescue service that we've been involved with has got that label or should have that label. I think it's completely wrong.
And it's interesting, Tristan, because I don't know is the honest answer to that question, whether that label is legitimate or applicable to some services or more than a few. I suppose the challenge for us is to understand that, to know that. And I do reference, we've got a raft of reviews there that would say there's really some significant challenges that haven't been addressed. And you've got to kind of really ask yourself, well, what is that down to? Because if it's down to people walking past some things that they shouldn't have walked past, then that's a problem. And look, and I suppose my point is now people are stopping walking past those things, but they were. And some of those kind of cultural reviews have identified that. So I'm not as I say, I'm not kind of saying, no, there's nothing to see here, we've moved on. There's real legitimacy in them cultural reviews. Real people who are at the heart of those, those kind of that inactivity or that that behaviour, who will suffer well into the future, right? And and our point and my point in my role and the work that's been done to date is to say, like, we won't have that happen again, and we'll create an environment where it is hostile to that kind of level of behaviour. And people know and they're clear on the standards that we expect and the behaviours that we expect, and when we don't see them, we will deal with it. And that might mean that there's a whole raft of conduct issues that surface in an organisation. But you know what? It'll be worth it to get to a place where it is better if people feel more included, they feel like they belong. And if they haven't felt like that over the course of a career so far, then they need to into the future. So whilst I'm not saying there isn't or wasn't institutional racism, sexism, misogyny in certain pockets, what I am saying is, a probably better descriptor for the sector in its totality is systemic. And as I say, systemic means shared ownership of the problem and shared ownership of the solutions. And that's what we're focusing in on now, is moving us on from where we were to where we want to be, and recognising that this is a journey.
I'm going to go back to fitness because I was pleased that you were willing to talk about that. I think the point we've been making continuously over the fitness standards is 100% agree. Everybody needs to be assessed correctly. They need to be fit. You need to be assessed for the job. You need to understand what the key elements are, what your limitations are. The point that I'm trying to have been banging on for a while is that if we want a diverse workforce, then the current fitness standard means that if you're female, chances are once you're past 40, you're not going to hit that standard. And if the fitness standard is fit for purpose, pardon the pun, then we need to acknowledge the fact that we are going to have a situation where it's probably not going to be a 30-year career in the whole time for a female firefighter unless you join really, really early. And that has connotations with regards to pensions, deferred pensions, etc. Because if all the scientific data, because this is not my opinion, if all the scientific data suggests that when you reach a particular age, chances are you're not going to hit 42.3 VO2 max, then we need to acknowledge that.
Yeah, and look, and it's interesting you say the scientific data and you reference age, and it kind of be interested in the age and gender kind of differentiation between the two too, to be perfectly honest with you, because I've seen some data, and whether this is accurate, and I kind of come back to data, intelligence, research, being at the real forefront of the decisions we make, because it's evidence based, and you can make good decisions based on having the evidence, right? So I still kind of haven't seen something that suggests that if you are over 40 and female, then you're more likely to exit the organisation than anyone else. There is clear evidence that if you're over 40 and male, your fitness levels decline over the period of time. I've seen some of that stuff. And when I'm 55, I've maintained my fitness right the way through my career, but it does become more and more challenging. Right? As you get older, there's no dispute around that. So I'll be led by the evidence, I suppose. And again, that's Tristan. I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that what you've said that you can't legitimise and you haven't got the evidence to present. But sometimes I think we take a view based on perception more than evidence, and I would like to be able to act on absolute concrete evidence and research to then inform the actions we take next. So if that was the case, and it was proven, then you kind of go, well, a career in the fire and rescue service. When I said, we're not the same as the police and we haven't got a diversification of roles. If we find ourselves in a position where people can't maintain their fitness despite their best efforts, then you look at the diversification of the role back into service. Arguably, we are crying out as it stands for more protection officers up and down the country, given some of the significant findings through Grenfell, the recommendations and business safety regulation and so on. So there are opportunities for us to look at things differently, funnily enough, but has to be informed by the evidence, what one would suggest. And what I certainly don't want to do, and I kind of go back to, we make these throwaway kind of decisions. One of the things I'm quite proud of, actually, when I look at the my kind of diversity credentials, was I went into Merseyside, and as soon as I became the chief, I got rid of quotas around gender. Right, I got rid of quotas around gender because I didn't need them, right, in the nicest possible way. But all they were a barrier to people around the mess table who were told that actually you've only got this job because you're female or you're from an ethnic background. You know what? Like that's not the kind of language I would ever want anyone to have to respond to or defend. So you don't need those quotas. You just need a real kind of focus on diversity of your organisation, because actually you recognise the power of diversity and you're back to ensuring that your communities are reflected by the people who work in your service.
Yeah, I'll definitely speak to you offline with regards to the fitness. I know women in fire service are on the same page as us, and I think there's some data with regards to bone density, genetic bone density, and the impact that can have on the aging body with regards to difference in gender. And I did note down earlier, I forgot to mention it, you said about police and fire are different beasts. 100% agree. And I think with the previous government, we've had a situation where, well, it works for the police, you're all blue light, therefore we'll dip you with regards to fire into the police sheep dip and think it will work. It doesn't, absolutely does not. And I think that's held us back somewhat in terms of fire. I think police and fire crime commissioners are an example of that as well. Fire is definitely unique, as is police, as our ambulance. And while there's collaboration that can be made with the blue light services, we should never lose sight of that fact. I'm just conscious of time as well. Could we speak about shift systems? Because I know with regards to your service, you've been quite innovative in what you've been doing there. I'm going to plead some ignorance with regards to this, because again, it being a metropolitan brigade, and previously we focused on call. What's been happening in Merseyside over the years with regards to changing of shift systems?
Look, well, I'm not the chief no more, but I'll probably reflect back on as we've got a variety of different duty systems in Merseyside, and look, and I think that that's a really good thing, actually, because if you've coming into a fire and rescue service in any way, shape or form, you can find one that fits for you as an individual. As I say, irrespective of what all firefighters are, personal commitments or family arrangements may be different dependent on circumstances, age, and so on. So having a range of duty systems that you can opt for, I think is a really positive positive thing. We have got a combination of whole time and retained, which has allowed us to, despite austerity, to cater or had, I should say, not does. Despite austerity, it's allowed us to grow the service to a greater or lesser degree. We were going to reduce the number of fire engines we had down to 26. There's 34 now, readily available across Merseyside, and with the intention to grow even further. There was 42 when I joined, so you'll understand the discrepancy there. But the fact of the matter is, diversity of duty systems has allowed us to build back into the service to a great lesser degree, and also resource to demand. So self-evidently, we are busier, or certainly Merseyside were twice as busy during the daytime than they were of a night time, and resource to reflect that. And actually, we would also understand in a whole time service, we're more productive with our time during the day than we are of a night time too. Safety interventions, protection visits, training in noisy environments, and so on and so forth. Of a night time, I'm not sure any member of the public wants you to knock on the door to offer them a smoke alarm in the nicest possible way. So, productivity plays a part in it, but equally does demand. But you've got to factor in risk, and you've got to ensure that you've got enough fire engines available day and night to reflect the challenges of response. But we sought to ensure that we had that blended approach, which allowed us to be able to resource to reflect risk, demand, and vulnerability across Merseyside.
So do you operate, or did you operate 12-hour shift systems in Merseyside?
Yeah, we did. We moved to 12-hour shifts, yeah.
Yeah. And didn't affect with regards to work-life balance or anything like that?
No, and it's funny, I suppose there's always a challenging conversation, Tristan, I suspect, because I'm not removed from some of the broader conversations that are going across around UK fire and rescue service and where they land. I'll just give you an honest opinion.
Yeah.
What you've got with any 24-hour period is opportunities to split the 24-hour period into equal sized chunks. Right, so 8s or 12s or a 24-hour period in its totality. To have a differential between one and the other doesn't allow the individual as much as the organisation to be able to interchange them. So in effect, if you're doing a 9-hour day and a 15-hour night, albeit if anyone was suggesting a 15-hour night these days in regards to working time and health and safety and risk and fatigue, then they'd probably be laughed out the room. But nevertheless, you can't interchange them, you can't swap them. The ability, and people think that it's driven for, a whole raft of different reasons: productivity, efficiency, whatever they perceive the driver to be. The real benefit I see is one for staff, which means that actually some people can come to work and do 4 days, right? Some people can do 3 days and 1 night. Some people can do 3 nights and 1 day. You can't do that on a shift system which has got an equal length of shift. That equally allows a fire and rescue service to resource to demand. So it has. I go back to twice as busy during the day than the night time. But if you were to put it into resourcing, you'd have more people available during the day than you would have at night time too. And having that equality of shift length allows that kind of interchangeability where you can resource your service to demand. So really, it's got nothing to do with productivity and efficiency and messing people about. It's very much about best meeting the needs of the community. But actually, and this is, I genuinely mean people could go to Merseyside and speak to the crews there. They welcome that ability to be able to self-manage a little bit more than arguably you would be able to do in other fire and rescue services who haven't adopted an equalisation of the shift length.
Again, looking at time, I'm just going to go back to broadening of the role because I did mention it earlier. Our history with regards to broadening of the role and the fact that we've been involved in co-responding schemes since I think we go back to the late 90s, and that we're promoting that and expanding that into other areas because our belief is, if you keep the remit narrow of the fire and rescue service, you're going to become less relevant as time progresses, and other organisations will fill that void. So what are your thoughts on not just or specifically EMR, but broadening of the role in general and the benefits that can bring to the firefighters and the fire services up and down the country?
Well, you've hit the nail on the head with regards to relevance in the first instance, but equally, let me answer it in going back to one of the first questions you asked me, is why have I taken on the role of the National Fire Chiefs Council Chair? Because I've got some unfinished business, probably from a personal point of view, and that's about understanding the kind of breadth of the work that we can do around the likes of emergency medical response. And I said, you can't deliver that locally in the way that I would have wanted to, but certainly you would want to elevate that to a position where you can do it nationally, and absolutely fundamentally recognise that firefighters the length and the breadth of the country are ably equipped and want to, as importantly, be able to intervene when someone's having a cardiac incident and save lives. That's how we're built. That's how we think. That's how we behave. And so, ensuring that we are able to step in and support others during their time of crisis is absolutely fundamental for me, and something that I want to go back and re-explore as part of the conversations I brought in the role. And actually, I think my conversations with all trade unions associated with the fire and rescue service, they recognise that too. And they also recognise the relevance of the fire and rescue service moving forward. And and the only reservations that they probably pick up on is not overreaching, and they're having an impact on our statutory responsibilities. And I get that too. And I looked at the states around some of the work that they do, and probably think that that's overstretched a little bit. So it's about defining the roles and responsibilities fire and rescue services have, but equally not just putting ourselves in this little box that says we go to fires and argue with road traffic collisions, and that's all we do, because I think that would be to our detriment. And so when we, and we will, and even part of the pay negotiations this time around, and the pay offer, defined within that pay offer is a commitment from all parties to revisit and I hesitate at the broadening the role kind of comment, because it's probably tainted now because it took so long to kind of get to fruition, or certainly to make progress on it. But looking at the role of the firefighter and the fire and rescue service more broadly into the future allows a conversation to open up around our capabilities, what we're equipped to do, how we can add value, how we can support our communities, and equally importantly, how we can recognise the role that the firefighter fulfills then on the basis of that breadth of role that they are undertaking.
Well, look, we've been going for just over an hour, and I know you're an extremely busy man, and I'm really, really grateful for you coming on, Phil, and I appreciate your honesty and your openness in your answers this afternoon. It's been a breath of fresh air, and I wish you all the very best over the next 4 years, and you'll certainly get all the support you need from us as a trade union. And I look forward to further discussions on a number of different topics in the coming years as well. So thanks again, Phil. I appreciate it.
No problem. Look, and I will come back anytime you want me, because there are things that we have just touched the surface of, no doubt. And as things open up over the course of the next 4 years, I'm more than happy to come and sit and chat, Tristan, you know that.
We'll get you on in a couple of years, if that's okay with you, when you're halfway through, and you can tell us of all the successes, or whether you're still bashing your head against the brick wall.
Yeah, let's hope not. All right.
Brilliant.
Cheers.
Thanks a lot. Cheers.